people who are / have been homeless. What was the first night without a home like, and how did you adapt to your new situation? Story 1. I was about 9 years old, and my mom said we were going on a camping trip. I didn't really suspect anything, as it was summertime, and we went camping a lot when I was younger. Although I did wonder why we were packing so much stuff. After a few weeks of camping, I started to complain, but my mom kept insisting that it was good for us to get in touch with nature, etc. Then school started, and we were still camping. And we kept camping for another 6 months. When we finally got a house, my mom cried with joy, and we don't camp anymore. Story 2. I was 13 when my parents kicked me out and told me they no longer wanted anything to do with me. I was terrified to visit a shelter because I'd known some foster kids and the whole system scared me, plus I wanted to continue going to the same school. Didn't want to lose my friends too. The scariest part at that age was really finding out what I was hoping to eat. There had been a dilapidated trailer just minutes down the road from my dad's place, so I stayed in that. I don't think it all really hit me until I had to choose one night between food and blankets, because the temperature was expected to drop down to the mid-30s, and I had only had one somewhat thin blanket at that point. The next day, I put on my best attire, which was nothing impressive, and asked for a job at Long John Silver's. I lied and told them I was 15, and I worked 5 days a week rushing over after school. I ate more unhealthy than I have since to save money for some form of shelter, which came in the form of a 91 Toyota Camry that I purchased out of the thrifty nickel for $300. I loved that clunker, plus heating myself was much easier. From there it was mostly uphill. Found an older lady willing to rent me her garage without any sort of credit check. Took a couch off the side of the road to sleep on. I even had internet in there where I mostly read scary stories all night. I wish video streaming services were really a thing back then, and I just kinda learned to roll with the punches. My childhood wasn't normal. It was downright terrifying a good chunk of the time, but it is what made me who I'm today. Story 3. I was homeless for a couple of months a year or two ago. I had a car and a low-paying job, so I lived in the woods in a tent for a bit. The first night was miserable. I ended up sleeping really uncomfortably in the passenger seat of my car, and it was a really cold night. After that I got a tent and slept on an old climbing pad I had. The first night was hell, but the next several weeks were actually not so bad. I had a spot in the woods where I was well hidden and would cook over a fire. I really didn't have it that bad, but it gave me quite a bit of sympathy for people who really do end up on the streets in a much more desperate situation. Shit is not easy. Story 4. I was only homeless for about 6 weeks, at 36 years of age. After several years of depression and anxiety slowly eroding my resources, relationships and general will to try anymore, I ended up having a final blowout with my GF, who reasonably couldn't handle me anymore. I started sleeping at work, which wasn't even a full-time job. The delicacy involved in not getting caught, and the freedom from the extremely unhealthy state my relationship had been in, kept my mind away from the absolute, abject terror that was hiding beneath the surface. The scary part of homelessness for me was the growing sense that, if I fell any further I'd probably never get back up. It takes resources to be clean, fed and rested, and if you aren't those things it's very hard to get resources, let alone find the will to try. But that first night was all tridge, all focused on being sure the second night wasn't going to be on the street. I pulled it off for 6 weeks, and that time, actually, saved my life. I was away from conflict, intimately connected to how dire my circumstances had become, forced into a very regular schedule. Routine is really good for me, but nigh impossible in a depressive state, and, without bills, was able to save enough for damaged deposit and rent. I still struggle with depression in a pretty serious way, but the animal terror of having nowhere and no one really seared itself into me. A better motivation would be the future I want than the future I fear, but as it stands I at least have a motivator strong enough to escape the incredible gravity of mental illness. Story 5. Sleeping in my car wasn't that bad. It was summer, so it was pretty warm, which was my biggest issue. Showered in the gym, and spent most of my day at the library before going to work. For the first few nights it wasn't bad. However, one night police found me sleeping in my car and escorted me to the local homeless shelter, which was one of the most terrifying nights of my life. Since I'm lying there in a top bunk when a huge argument breaks out because one guy breaks out some meth, wouldn't share it with a second. Then a third got pissed and started screaming at them to be quiet because he needed to sleep. Story 6. When you're a teenager, it seems kind of cool to sleep in the car, on the couch or floor of a friend or acquaintance, or for your dad to scam a rented apartment for a month or two without paying for it. Moving around every few months carrying everything that you can in an old Honda Civic seems like an adventure. We once moved a couch across town in it. We must have looked like a couple of idiots. Once, after a few months of staying in a place where we had no furniture, were sleeping on the floor, the carpet of which was so flea infested that you could literally see the fleas hopping around. The landlord got so frustrated with us basically squatting in his property, my dad promised to pay and never did, that he removed the front door. So we went out to scam some food from somewhere and came back to find no front door. Which in retrospect is a pretty awesome way to get someone out of your property. One of the ways we scammed food would be to go to the breakfast buffet of a fancy hotel, tell the server that we had a room there, eat a ton of food and just walk out. This was also kind of fun, but looking back it is a kind of ducked up way for a dad to treat his teenage kid. Story 7. First night my wife and I landed up sleeping outside. We slept in a local park that I knew. We had come down from the countryside with a few rands, enough for one meal maybe, and had hoped to stay with a friend. He was unable to give us a place to stay, so we had to sleep outside. After the insecurity of that first night, I told my wife that we have to find a safer place to sleep, so we climbed up the slopes of Table Mountain, about a 1-hour walk, and found quite a obscured spot amongst some bushes and trees. We cleared it out of sticks and rocks, made it a bit habitable, and then went make to the city looking for work. We'd spend the day going from one place to the next looking for work until it started growing dark. Then we'd head up the mountain to our little spot for the night. Did that daily for a month until we were able to secure a small shack room in the townships, where we stayed for another few months until I get a job offer. Was my wife's temp waitering jobs that kept us fed whilst I was looking for work. Biggest challenge was mental, keeping focused, clean, looking presentable and just making my job looking for a job. Story 8. When I was a teenager I had lots of problems with my mom. I pretty much chose to be homeless. I slept at a Catholic church across from my high school, so I could still make it to school and graduate early. I remember feeling really sad because I slept where they put people's ashes, and I remember being so sad that those people could comfort me in death more than anybody alive. I used to talk to them. If there's camera footage I'll look insane. I never realized how alone I was in the world until I was homeless. And I never realized how cold concrete can be. It chills you right to your bones and is painful. Story 9. I started being homeless at 19. A previous foster parent put me out for coming home from college one night, and I had called up a friend last minute. When I started to realize I wouldn't be able to crash or stay anywhere, I'm fairly certain I started to dread and spiral into a constant, underlying depressive state. All I could think about was, am I going to die like this? Do I matter? Will no one help me? I'm sad. I'm scared. I don't want to feel like I have to beg. What if I'm stuck like this? Is this really my life right now? 19 to 26 was a very challenging time. Story 10. I once was fooled by an ex into moving back in with her after a breakup. After a couple of weeks she decided to have a yard sale. This yard sale ended up featuring most of my stuff. Then with money in hand she decided it was time I went back to my place. My place which had nothing in it. My place which I had given notice on. My place which was already awaiting a new renter. I spent my last 2 weeks sleeping on a hardwood floor using sweaters as blankets, and then when the day came to vacate I threw all my clothes in a plastic bag and just started walking. I was destitute. I had absolutely nothing, and no idea where to start. It was right in the Canadian winter, so staying outside would be a death sentence in many cases, so I did the only thing I could think of. I sat in a 24-hour Tim Hortons. I used what little money I had to purchase small coffees once in a while, so I at least had an excuse to sit there. Eventually my cash ran out, and I thought for sure I'd get the boot. Then one of the ladies working the counter came over and just handed me my usual order. I guess she probably figured out what was going on and felt bad. The second time she did it, I struggled not to cry. I'm pretty thankful, because my next idea, if I was asked to leave, was to politely refuse, then sit and wait for the cops. Better than freezing to death. Morning came and I had saved only enough to catch a single bus. Headed downtown to try to find some friends. I did, and I couch surfed between a lot of them. I never spent a night out in the cold, but I spent many in a coffee shop, or bouncing between friends. It was the worst my depression ever got, and the closest I ever came to actually ending my life. Things are a million times better for me now, but I'll never forget how worthless I felt. Story 11. I was getting high, so it really didn't truly sink in, until I was broke and dope sick. Then the desperate yawn started. Going to gas stations, jumping car to car asking for money. Stealing what I had to. It was a miserable existence. There are so many things you don't think about when you're not homeless. Taking a shower, washing your clothes, and the boredom. Hours upon hours of nothing to do. And the constant noise. There was nowhere to go where it was truly quiet. Fortunately, I eventually got arrested for shoplifting, reached out to family who helped me get back on my feet. Story 12. My parents didn't tell us that they lost their house to the bank. One day we left everything but a few clothes and essentials. I remember sitting in the car watching the world outside, and I felt extremely alone. The drive just endlessly went, unless we had to go to the bathroom. We ate some cracker things, and had water at rest stops from bathrooms. Sleeping in a car seat that you couldn't lay back really was hard to adapt to, so I didn't sleep for the first couple nights. It really sucked, but as the days turned into weeks things just became the new normal. We would drive around for hours and sometimes camp out at campgrounds or roadsides instead of sleeping in our woefully tiny car. This completely ruined our education, because we couldn't stay at any school long. I loved school for their food and I would steal paper, pens, and books sometimes, so I had something to do. My mother eventually said she would just homeschool us, but that was soon dropped for us kids to do for ourselves. I was able to almost get my JED before a sickness stopped me, but some of my younger siblings only have an education from 3rd or 4th grade. When it was winter, I remember having to take showers from those hand pumps at the campground. The water was so cold it would instantly burn and numb up anything it touched. We also didn't have winter clothes, so most of us would wrap up in our old blankets and layers of clothes. We rarely had any food and I resorted to eating some of my clothes, paper, grass, or tiny pieces of my own skin to try to not feel hungry. Once we had to eat pancakes as our main food for months. I cannot eat pancakes anymore because the very smell of them makes me sick now. Other food we got was ramen, and rarely a hot dog. I'm not sure how my parents managed to get the food or have money, even if it was very little. Maybe from a food pantry. Cooking food on the fire wasn't that hard to do, and I learned how to make a fire and gather what a fire needs. If we got sick we never went to a doctor, just had to hope it got better. We were on and off homeless until I was in my late teens, when my grandmother bought my parents a house for us all to live in. It still feels so strange to actually have a home and even food. I still have a hard time knowing a lot of social norms because of the isolation from homelessness. You just do what you can to survive. I still resent my parents for avoiding any help from the government or going to any homeless shelters. They lost our house because of stupid spending and going into bankruptcy. Their habits never changed. We would get a place to live for maybe a year or two, then lose it because my parents were terrible at managing money. Story 13. I packed 3 bags, one with clothes, blankets, and a pillow, one with food, and one with books. I couch surfed for a little bit, a week or 2 with each of my friends, slept in my car while I had it. I used other people's kitchens to cook stolen food, and ate food that 7 to 11 threw away every morning at about 6 AM. Night shift would throw out all the food that sat too long. I would wait for the clerk to go back inside and then fish the bag out of the dumpster. Slept outdoors in some parks after the car got towed, and I used up my friend's goodwill. Got really good at 5 to 10 minutes wash-ups in public bathrooms with hand soap, teeth, armpits, underboobs, and butt. Let me tell you how nasty hand soap tasted. Would occasionally wash my underwear with hand soap real quick too, and dry it with the hand dryers. I would generally use 24-hour McDonald's at about 4 AM so no one would walk in on me. What I would do is I would panhandle outside of a subway station for enough money for a crack rock, an egg of heroin, a needle, and a sandwich and tea. If you wear semi-professional clothes and say OMG, my purse got stolen, does anyone have any spare change? You get more money than just asking AMD wearing, like, jeans. I would then go to the first McDonald's, order the sandwich, and say I had to use the bathroom. Then I would do a wash up, grab the sandwich, and eat it on the way to the next McDonald's. At the second McDonald's, I would order a tea, and ask for lemon juice, pocket the juice, and ask to use the restroom. In the restroom I would use the juice to break down the crack, mix it with the heroin, and shoot up. Then, sadly, I would usually actually use the bathroom in a park or something. Did this for years, until I accidentally got pregnant. I would be goddamned if I screwed my kid up by being a junkie, so I cold turkeyed everything. I own a house now, and will be 14 years clean on November 18th. Story 14. I didn't really realize what was going on. I was about 6 to 7 at the time. Dad said we were going to go for a drive and to pack my backpack with all the clothes I could fit and one toy. Mom was just crying. Me and my brother sat in the backseat. He was a little older and was holding our Sega Genesis and looking scared. We drove for a little while. It was already getting dark and we parked in front of a Walmart and Dad said he had to rest for a while. Was the first of many nights we slept in the car. I remember one of my parents was always awake with their hand in their coat pocket. Looking back it was obvious they had a gun for protection. Sleeping in shifts. Story 15. My ex-wife made up a bunch of shit to get a restraining order. I got served at work while she simultaneously shut off my phone service and locked me out of our shared bank account. This was January 7th, 2016. I had a t-shirt and slacks to wear for clothes and nowhere to sleep. My car didn't have working heat. Thank God for my parents who got me a hotel, new phone, and some money for clothes. I ended up living in an extended stay hotel for 2 months while I looked for an apartment and got my affairs in order. The restraining order was dismissed, the divorce went to trial, and I got the house and the kids. Story 16. I lived at school until I dropped out due to a bunch of personal reasons piling up. My mom was mad that I dropped out and wouldn't even talk to me the first few days after, and my relationship with my father is complicated / non-existent. I took the train to my hometown, even though I didn't know what I would do or where I would go. When I got there, I ended up staying the first night in my brother's room, not quite an apartment, just the one room with a kitchen and bathroom he shares with like 5 other people. After that, I posted to social media that I was in this unfortunate situation, and a friend I had lost touch with despite once being very close offered that I could stay with him and his fiancée until I got a place of my own. I never actually had to sleep outside, and I found an apartment after about 1 month, so all in all I was pretty lucky with how it turned out. Oh, and my mom and I are cool now, and my dad and I are also trying to rebuild our relationship after he finally divorced his no longer new wife. I've always referred to her as his new wife, even though it's been over a decade. Story 17. I was homeless for a little while in the 80s. It's terrifying at first. You feel so unsafe. I was a teenager and wasn't willing to close my eyes and sleep on a park bench alone. So, I went to a local shelter and lied about my age. They forced me to shower and do a pee test. It turns out the women in that shelter were scarier than the street, so the next night I didn't go back. I slept in a park, but ultimately made squatter friends and stayed with them. It was very much a community, and I felt safe and loved their point. The biggest problem with being homeless in the city is no one wants to let you use the bathroom. Even park bathrooms are locked. Squat peeing in between cars can be done quickly and undercover, but when you get your period it's a nightmare. Point these days I have stability, so I never pass a homeless person without buying them some food or giving them a little money, and if they use it for drugs or alcohol I don't care. Living on the streets is hard. Drink if you need to, my friend. Story 18. First thing I realized at 18 when leaving home and finding myself stranded straight away is that I wasn't as unlucky as I had always thought. Female, young and normal looking, got support from loads of random people who deemed me very brave. It hit me really hard that, if I was fat, or a guy, I would have been screwed. I lived in Spain by then, and a couple of nights at a park was quite exciting. Just a couple of nights is what it took to get emergency accommodation, and nobody bothered me. Then jumped from shit job to shit job for a few weeks, ended up getting a year-long apprenticeship selling shoes. Second, I learned that hitchhiking is very cheap and pretty safe in Europe. Just kept clean looks, did loads of workaway placements, and slowly got on my feet. I'm 28 now, and settling down in Cornwall, UK, which is the nicest place where I could ever imagine living. Story 19. I was actually born homeless. My mom put newborn me into a small laundry basket filled with blankets she'd been gifted. I spent the first year of my life living out of a car with my family. My mom had my 5-year-old brother and 4-year-old sister with her too, all living out of a Grand Caravan in the early 90s. She'd taken us to Wyoming to hide in the Rocky Mountains, so at least I got to sleep under the stars at night. I've been homeless most of my life. I have stories about it if anyone finds this and is interested. Story 20. I was 18 and had depression. Only had to do the final exams and I would have been good to go. But I panicked and didn't attend, which caused me to fail of course. Me failing made my depression even worse. My parents couldn't take it anymore, packed my clothes in a case and set me on the street. I had no idea where to go and didn't want to sleep in the city like most homeless do because I was too afraid of something happening to me or the few things I had while I sleep. So I went deep into the woods, opened the case with my clothes, and curled up in there to sleep. Needless to say I didn't sleep much that night. I was just too disappointed in myself for being such a failure and cried a lot. Thank God I wasn't homeless long before my grandparents took me in, until I found a job. When I had a job my parents took me back in, and I went to therapy. I'm good now, but getting abandoned by my parents when I needed them the most still hurts to this day. Story 21. I was homeless about a year or two ago. It was bad. Although, the reason I left was because I was being abused by my father, so I guess you could say it was sort of better. As everyone says, the first night is bad. Bad. You come to the conclusion that this is really happening. There was actually a shelter that took me about 5 hours to walk to. I had no idea what huge difference a car would make, but I'm going to give advice. Do not bother going to a shelter. Maybe it was because I went from one lifestyle to another in a day, but the people there are rowdy, they smell, they steal your stuff, and fights have broken out more than one time. I only lasted 3 days before I left and decided to leave that. I found a secluded place in a parking lot that wasn't too bad to sleep in, and probably for the whole time, except for when I went long distances away from the area, I would sleep there. It was shaded from the sun, it didn't get too stuffy, it was spring to summer, and again, pretty hard to find. At least, I've never seen anyone sleep there. I brought my phone with me when I left, and when I went to a Starbucks or a library or whatever else, I would get on Wi-Fi and watch YouTube or whatever else I was feeling at the time. That's actually how I found Reddit, and I lurked for a while before I ever started posting. I would visit libraries and search for jobs online. Thank God they let anyone use the computers. After I got a job, it took a few more months, but I rented a small apartment and then applied for school. I'm on scholarship right now, technically full ride if you count the 3 others. I've been living in the dorms, but I'm getting ready to move in with a friend. So what's being homeless like? It's so ducking hard. It makes you want to cry. I've had moments where I thought I would be better off dead since both lives, with family and homeless, were failing. I never want to go back to that time. I'm going to treat my kids right so they never have to go through that or feel like they have to make that decision for themselves. I kinda went off on a tangent, so sorry if I ended up saying more than what the question asked. Nobody else in my life knows about me being homeless, so I'm extremely grateful for Reddit letting me express myself. Story 22. I was young, 11 years old, but I was aware my mom was on drugs and that my situation was going where it ended up. It started out with moving a lot, state to state, wherever the cheapest place to live was. The living conditions got worse with each move. In our last house as a family, before we got taken away by CPS, we had to clean it out before moving in. Some deal my mom made with the landlord. It was disgusting. Full of mouse shit, dirty needles, porno magazines, and the floor was completely covered in garbage. Oh well, I thought, at least it's a house. I was excited for a new place to live. Then, the gas got shut off, and the electricity, in the middle of winter. My mom's car got the windshield busted out of it, and we used plastic wrap to fix it. We were always cold. The cops would knock on our door, and we'd do as we were trained: hide under the beds, don't answer, don't make a sound. Once the utilities were out, I knew we'd be moving again. We stayed in a homeless shelter for a short while, until school started back up. I was in middle school for less than 2 months, before in the middle of the night, as usual, my mom said to pack our things and we'd be moving that night. But I didn't realize how bad on meth she was, not fully, not until we arrived in Death Valley, and slept outside of a church. Desert nights are very cold and the days are very miserable when you live outside. I just accepted it. I felt my 11-year-old heart grow cold, like a candle was blown out in me. My mom didn't enroll us in school. We got MRSA, a flesh-eating disease, and got no medical treatment. We weren't fed, so we'd steal food from stores and ask restaurants for free samples. I met 2 strangers who cared and bought us food. It was embarrassing. I felt unworthy. Being homeless made me feel a little less human than everyone around me. I could go on about the experience, but this comment is long enough, lol. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more daily videos.